Hello, my name's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well. Today I am going to do my September wrap up part 1. So I have 7 books to talk about. No, 8 books to talk about in this wrap up. So we'll get straight into it. So the first book that I read in September was A Town Called Solace by Mary Lawson. So A Town Called Solace was longlisted for this year's Booker Prize. It has not been shortlisted, which I'm not surprised about because I didn't like this book. I thought it was really boring. And it's odd because with some of the other longlisted books, and the same goes for the Women's Prize as well, where I haven't liked them, I can normally understand why the book has been longlisted, even if I haven't liked it. But with A Town Called Solace, I don't really understand. So the first half of the book, I was like, yeah, this is fine. I felt like I'd read hundreds of books like it before. And then the second half of the book I just found really boring. So in the book there's 3 narratives. So the first narrative is from the point of view of Clara, who is a young girl. I think she's, I'm going to say 8 years old, something like that. Her 16-year-old sister, has gone missing, ran away from home. And so, it is interesting to get her point of view as a young child, her trying to understand what's going on, her only being told by her parents certain bits of information. The second viewpoint we have is from Elizabeth, who is Clara's next door neighbour. Elizabeth is in hospital. While Elizabeth is in hospital, Clara has been tasked with feeding Elizabeth's cat, Moses. And the third point of view is from, I think, a character called Liam, who is going into Elizabeth's house while she's in hospital. And Liam knew Elizabeth when he was a young child, and some of that backstory is revealed as the story progresses. So yeah, I didn't really like that book, but I do have plans to read the shortlist for this year's Booker Prize. So I read 5 of the long listed books and DNF'd 1 other. And then at the point the shortlist was announced a few days ago, as I'm filming, I had only read 1 of the 6 shortlisted books, which is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, which I really like. So I have plans to read the remaining 5 books on the shortlist before the winner's announced at the start of November. So that's what I'll be doing over the next month or so. Okay, so the next book I read in September was Thornhill by Pam Smy. So this book is wonderful. Okay, I really, really like this book. So this is a YA children's book, which it only took me just over an hour to read this, even though it looks really thick, because a lot of it is in pictures. So in the book we have 2 narratives. So the first narrative that we have is from a character called Mary, who is writing in 1982, and it's her diary. So we have excerpts of her diary. Mary lives in a girls' orphanage called Thornhill, and she is being bullied by another girl in the orphanage. She has a pretty miserable existence. The second perspective is from a character called Ella in the present day, I say present day, in 2017, who has just moved into the house next door to the orphanage. So the orphanage by this point in time is like a disused, an old ramshackle building. So Ella moves next door with her father, her father's away quite a lot for work or something. So she's spending a lot of time alone at home, and her perspective is only told in the pictures that we get throughout the book. Ella finds Mary's diary and is reading about her and about Mary's life. We also get some excerpts from newspaper articles, newspaper cuttings at the time, which tell us bits about what happened at Thornhill, the orphanage. Ella finds like these old dolls on the grounds of the orphanage, because Mary used to make these dolls, I think almost like as friends for herself, and so Ella finds these old dolls, and this is a really, really creepy book. It's deliciously creepy. The ending is brilliant, and I mean, okay, just look at that. Like, if you're not scared by dolls, then seriously, there's something wrong with you. Honestly, this is such a great book. This will be a great read for spooky season, for October. So if you can get your hands on a copy of this, if you get it out of your library, honestly, it's such a great read. I highly recommend it. Okay. The next book I read was The Earthquake Bird by Susanna Jones. So this is quite a strange book. So this is set in Tokyo, and we follow Lucy, who is a British woman living in Tokyo, working as a translator of like some sort of technical manuals. Right at the start of the story, Lucy is arrested in connection with the murder of another British woman living in Tokyo called Lily. And so we get Lucy's story. Most of the story is told in first person from Lucy's point of view. However, every so often there's the odd sentence which is told in third person from Lucy's point of view, just randomly, like in the middle of a page, which is quite an interesting narrative choice, because it makes you as the reader, and this happens right from the start. So when it first happened, I just thought I'd got the characters' names wrong and that the narrator wasn't Lucy, that must have been someone else, but no. So this happens right from the start, and it makes you as the reader doubt Lucy and her reliability as a narrator, and it makes you wonder why do we keep flipping every so often into the third person. The only other book I think that I've read that does anything sort of similar is Lolita, where you have, but I mean, I think it's done really masterfully in Lolita, where even within the same sentence it flips between the first and the third person. So you get the main character's Humbert, is that his name? You get him telling you his story, but also viewing himself as an observer in order to try to excuse his actions. So I think it's done really, really well in Lolita. It still works in this book, but it's not as good as that. So yeah, it's kind of an odd story. It's won like several awards, Best Crime Debut 2001, etc. And it is a weird little story. It's been made into a Netflix film actually, which I'd be interested to watch the film and see how they portray it on film. This cover I think is terrible, but presumably it's from the Netflix film. So what I particularly did like about this book is we do have a tight focus. We only have a handful of key characters. So we have Lucy, we have Lily, and we also have Lucy's ex-boyfriend, who for some reason is not on the scene any longer. So we find out more about him as we go through the story as well. So if you're into sort of mystery, crime with a bit of an edge, then I would recommend this book. Next up, So, I'm going to mention a book that I DNF'd, which I don't normally talk about because I DNF books all the time. But I'm just going to mention this because this is one that Lasante, our cat, chose for me to read during September, and that's Ace of Spades by Faridah Abike-Iyimide. So, this is a YA book which is set in a high school in America, and there is someone, we don't know who is sending malicious like text messages to all the students, spreading gossip about certain other students, basically. And I don't think this is a bad book by any means. I maybe got 50 pages into it, something like that. Maybe a bit more, actually. Probably more. But I just wasn't feeling it. For some reason, it wasn't working for me. And so I DNF'd it. But like, if you think this sounds interesting, then by all means give it a go. It's not a bad book by any means. So instead of that, I picked up one of the books which Asante had rejected in that video, excuse me, which was Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. So this is a brilliant book. Okay, I really, really like this book so much. So this is another YA novel. So we follow, the main character is Jam, who is a young black girl who lives with her parents. Her mother is an artist. And one day her mother has painted this picture of quite a monstrous looking creature who has, I think, like the body of a goat, but then covered in feathers and human hands. And inadvertently, Jam brings this creature to life. And the creature is called Pet. So, the town where they live in is called Lucille. And in Lucille, we find out that previously there have been monsters living in Lucille, which were eradicated by angels. And when they talk about monsters and angels, they are talking about like normal people, I think, as in like baddies. So all like the bad guys have been eradicated. However, Pet believes that there is still a monster living in Lucille, and Pet has come to hunt the monster. Okay. What's interesting is that because in Lucille they believe that they've got rid of all the monsters, no one even believes there could be any monsters anymore. No one's looking out for any red flags. They just don't believe that there could possibly be any more monsters in the town, which is where Pet comes along. What I particularly loved about this book is some of the quieter elements of the story, which don't necessarily relate to the plot, but just quietly sit in the background. So, for example, there's a 3-parent family in this book, not the main family, but another family. So there's a mother, a father, and a third parent who uses they, them pronouns. And none of that is like overly explained. It's not part of the plot. It just is. And I think it's brilliant. And there's a couple of other aspects as well to the story. And, there's no great fanfare about them, but they just are. And that's what I really, really particularly loved about this book. It is a great plot as well. Great characters, great writing. I love Emezi. They are just fabulous. This is a brilliant, brilliant book. Honestly, this might be like a YA book, but honestly, you should absolutely check it out because it is brilliant. Okay, next up, I read a book which was one of the ones Lasante chose for me. to read in September. And this is A Cat, a Man and Two Women by Junichiro Tanizaki, translated from Japanese. So this is only a dead short little book. In this book we follow, we have a couple who've separated, and the man has a new partner, and the cat, who belonged to the couple, lives with the man and his new partner. And the woman, who is now living by herself, wants this cat back. And the real reason she wants the cat back is because she thinks if she has the cat, then this guy is going to like want to visit her and get back together with her, basically. And she doesn't really like the cat that much. Like, the cat's just a cat to her. So what is quite sweet is that she does sort of like she starts to develop a relationship with the cat, which is kind of cute and heartwarming. I would have liked a bit more of the cat in this book, but it was still good. It was a cute read, a quick read, and it was heartwarming. So a thumbs up from me. Next up, I read The Girl with the Larding Voice by Abike-Iyimide. So this is a book which I've heard a lot about, and it feels like everyone's read this book and everyone loves this book, which worried me a bit, because quite often when everyone loves a book, I don't necessarily get on with it as well. But I did like this book very much. So we follow a dunny who lives in Nigeria, and when she is 14, she is made to marry a man who I think already has 2 wives. A dunny, doesn't want to do that. A dunny is very focused on her education. She wants to go to school, she wants to learn, she wants to be a teacher when she grows up. So there's a lot in this book about the importance of education and learning, and how much that means to a dunny. As we follow through the story does move on in other directions from her being married to this man. And she goes through some harrowing circumstances, but she is a really well written character, and she has almost, but not quite, almost a Pollyanna-ish something about her, in that she always has sort of like a gentle sense of humour and a positive outlook on life, despite everything that she's been through, which kind of sounds a bit twee when I say it, but it works in the story. Honestly, this is a really good book. This would be a good book like to read for a book club. I feel like my book club would love this book. So this is a really well written book. I think a dunny is a great character who stays with you once you've read the book, and I would highly recommend it. Okay, we're getting there. Next up, I read The Appeal by Janice Hallett. So this is a fairly recently released book. This is a library copy. This is a good book. This is an interesting format. So this is a murder mystery. This is on the sort of cozier end of murder mystery, as opposed to being sort of gritty. The novel is structured around a QC who has sent a bundle of paperwork to 2 of his law students and asked them to look through it, read through it, and tell him their thoughts on it. We know that someone has been murdered. It's quite far on in the book before we find out who that is. We know from the blurb that someone has been sent to prison for that murder, possibly incorrectly. But again, quite late on in the book before we find out who that is. The book is told in emails. So most of the bundle of paperwork that these two law students have received is emails between people who live in this small town. So the background is that within the small town there is a amateur dramatic group, and who are putting on a play. And then early on in the story, the grandchild, the granddaughter of like the most powerful family in the village, if you like, who sort of run the theatre group, their granddaughter is diagnosed with cancer. So that's where the appeal comes in. They set up a charity appeal, and the emails sort of switch focus at the start from being about putting on the play to being about raising money for this granddaughter. So the play is still part of that because they're looking to raise money through putting on the play, but there's other things going on to raise money. I will say that some of the emails, like, you wouldn't send an email in that circumstance, like you'd text someone, or you know what I mean, you don't email to the extent that these people are emailing. What is interesting is that you're very aware when you're reading it that you are only getting, there's a lot of assumptions that you're making as you're reading the emails, and obviously we all know that emails can be portrayed in different ways. You can read them different to how they're intended and so on. Some characters we see very little from, even though they are mentioned a lot in emails. There might be a lot of emails to them, but we don't necessarily hear a lot from their point of view. So you are trying to come to your own conclusions about those characters. Interspersed throughout the story, we have text messages from between the two law students. So every so often they'll be checking in with each other, saying, where are you up to in the bundle? What are your thoughts? What are you thinking? As we get deeper into the story, the QC drips additional information to the two students, asks them to think about additional questions or additional puzzles, which propels you through the story, because it does add extra layers of intrigue, extra elements of mystery, to keep you reading. For me, the ending didn't quite have the oomph I wanted, but I think that possibly could have been to do with how I was reading it, because having to put it down and go to work and stuff, but also because it is all told as documentary evidence, so whether that's emails or whether that's other documentation. So somehow for me it maybe lacked a little bit of something, a little bit of oomph at the end, but that's like a minor criticism. If you are into crime fiction, if you think this sounds interesting, then absolutely I recommend you pick this up. So if you think that sounds interesting, if you're into crime fiction, then I absolutely recommend you pick this up, and I'll definitely be reading whatever Janice Hallett writes next. And then the final book I have to talk about is Multiple Choice by Alejandro Zambra. This tiny little book was a random book that I picked up at the library last weekend. It was just on the display shelf, and I thought it sounded interesting. So this is translated from Spanish. It's by a Chilean author, and it has the format of a multiple choice questionnaire. So apparently in Chile, up until the year 2003, in order to apply to university in Chile, students had to sit this multiple question paper. so that's what gave the author the idea for the format of this novel. So we have sort of, I think, 5 different sections with different types of multiple choice questions. So for example, this section is like, you have 5 different sentences and it asks you to put them in the right order of what you think makes sense. I mean, you don't have to go through doing the exercises because I think you get the point without necessarily going through and doing it. There's some that have like fill in the blanks, and then like towards the end there's like sort of reading comprehension questions, so you get longer pieces of texts and it asks you questions at the end. I didn't love this book, however I liked the format. I think the format works, and I think it's a really interesting format because as it gives you as the reader a different way to interact with the story. It puts you more within the story and forces you to reflect on your own thoughts about that. So I do, a lot of people probably wouldn't, but I do like the format. There was something about the book, maybe there's some sort of like political stuff in here, and maybe I think some of it just passed me by, like went over my head a little bit. But it is an interesting little book. So if you think this sounds interesting, if you can get a copy of this from your library or something, I'd be interested to see what you think of it, because it's the kind of book that I'd maybe reread at some point and maybe give a bit more time to, because I did read it quite quickly. But yeah, weird little book. Okay, so that's all the books that I'm going to talk about today. I have read one more, but I'm going to save that for my end of September wrap up because I'm tired. It's Friday, finished work, and I need to have a lie down. So I hope you're all well. Please let me know in the comments below if you've read any of the books I mentioned. What did you think of them? And I'll see you all again soon for another video. Bye.